Okay, let's talk about JSON and events and how it all kind of comes together. We're also going to talk about objects for a little bit. And I want to introduce objects in a really interesting or straightforward way because I'll tell you what, they can be a pain in the butt. And it took me a long time before I was like, oh, an object. I totally understand what you're talking about, computer programming. So what's an object? Well, think about everything in the universe. That's an object. And in computer programming, we just kind of take that idea. It's very um, philosophical, very metaphysical here. Everything is objects, and we can create objects in code. And an object is just a thing in computer speak, right? An object. What do objects have? Well, every object, every computer language that has objects usually has these three things. Objects always have properties, okay? So what's an object property? Well, the best way to explain this is to think of an object that you have in your world right now. So I have an object, I have a cat, okay? And so my cat is a type of object. Does that make sense? My cat is a type of object. And my cat has properties. And properties are things that describe the cat. Well, what kind of properties does my cat have? My cat has eye color. My cat has fur color. My cat has fur length. So all objects have properties. What else do objects have? Well, objects also have methods. What's methods? Well, it just means things the object can do. For most of the stuff we're going to work on in this class, all we have to worry about is this, but I'll keep telling you the rest. Methods are things the object can do. Well, what kind of things can my cat do? He can lay there. He can jump. And he can cry when he's hungry. Right? So they have properties, they have methods, and then what they have is inheritance, which again, we're not going to have to worry about that, but I'm just going to tell you. And so inheritance is what it pulls down from other objects that it may have come from. I know it's so weird. It's so hard to explain this stuff. But when you think about inheritance, and again, our cat example, like what kind of things did a cat inherit from being the next level up, which is a mammal, right? So what did it inherit from being a mammal? Well, it inherited that it had warm blood and live kittens, the whole thing, right? Milk, the whole thing, right? So that's what it inherits. It inherits things from the main object that it came from. And again, you don't have to worry about really these things right now. All we're going to worry about for the rest of the semester is pretty much around properties. And really, why is it properties? It's really properties because we're going to be using JSON to store data, and it becomes an object, and those objects each have properties. And so the properties for JSON, like you did in the earlier example, might be something like your object might be what? Your object might be an array of, so you might have an array of courses or an array of objects. Because that's what's so nice about objects is that you can have an array of them. So you can have a list of different ones. And why would you do that? Well, let's say in the earlier exercise where I had you just make a JSON file of courses. You know, your objects, each object's going to have what? Well, it's going to have a course name, a course number, and a course instructor. And the cool part is that every one of the things in the list said course name, and then it had the name, and then course number, the number, and course instructor. You created an object. That's what you were doing. Is that JSON that's why it's called JavaScript object notations, because that thing becomes an object. And then you can take that object and you can do all kinds of fun stuff with it, which is some of the examples you may have seen where we're going to cut up the array of objects and turn them into text and parse it and all kinds of other good technical terms. But that's all you need to know about objects for what we're doing. Again, we're going to create these objects with our JSON, and we can go from there. Now, the easiest thing right now for me to do is to walk you through the example that the W3C schools, whatever, walks you through as a JSON example. And so what are we going to do? Well, we're actually going to pull in an external file, an external text document, because that's really close to what we'll be doing when we do really amazing things this semester. We're going to pull in some text, and then we're going to manipulate it, and we're going to display it. Okay? So I'm going to use their example, and we're going to walk ourselves through it and make it happen. In this lesson, you will use arrays, variables. You will use a little bit of objects, but just from JSON. And you will do some different functions. It's all the stuff that we've been learning so far put together. So put your big thinking caps on, because here we go. All right, so here's a page. Now, if you remember from the last video I did, what they did is they have the script down below, and we're just going to go ahead with that. So here I'm going to copy it, move it over to our code, do our HTML page. Can't not put the head in the title, and I'm sorry. Body, paste what they put, / body, and go from there. Let's save it as a page. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so we have a div tag. That shouldn't look unfamiliar to you. You know what that is. A script tag. That shouldn't look unfamiliar. You know what that is. Usually we keep our script tags in the head. They're putting in the body for ease. We have a variable called XMLHTTP. The variable shouldn't be new. Equals new XMLHTTP request. Okay, that's a little weird. What's that? Well, this is an object. This is a special kind of object. Every so often, we'll be creating objects that people use all the time. In this case, this is a common one. This is what's actually going to let us. This object is what's going to let us actually load files from the server. Hey, by the way, what file are we loading? Well, we're loading mytutorials.txt. Okay. Now, here's some things. Remember I told you that they had methods, and I said you wouldn't have to worry about that? Well, just so you know, these are some methods of an object. The XML HTTP object has an event, in fact, called onReadyStateChange. And so this event is just like the other events we've learned, but we were using clicks and on mouse overs. In this case, it's a ready state change. That basically means when something's loaded. Well, what's it? What do you do when something's loaded? Well, you make a function. Hey, this looks just like the other stuff we're doing. And then there's an if, a conditional. What? This is so great. In this case, it has some variables it checks, a property, the ready state, if it equals 4. Don't worry about that. Just know that it's always 4. I don't even know what that means. The XML HTTP status is 200. So if these two things that we have no control over are true, that's what it's saying. Because remember, those are two things together. Do this and this. So do this whole thing, right? So create an array. So you're going to parse out what it loads. That's this XML HTTP.response text. That's a property. And then you're going to run your function with myArray. So I do understand that from here to here is probably going to be a little weird because it's new. But you know what? I do the exact same thing. Like when I make apps like this, I just have to keep going back to this code. All you care about is from here to here. This is what you can control. And then open it and send it. And again, you just have to include these things. What's it going to open? The URL. And we go from there. Okay, well, all right. Then what happens? Well, remember how this thing calls my function myArray, and it asks for the myArray as a property. So this is my function, asks for the array for the property. And what it does, like, look at this. So there is something called out, which is a string. Why do we know it's a string? Because it's in quotes and it's blank string. We have a variable called I. Well, what do we usually use I for? For iterating. Hey, look, it's a for loop. These should not be foreign to you. For loops, I equals 0, while I is less than the array's length. Again, not foreign. Increase the I, each time. Now, this one's a little weird. This out plus equals is the same as saying out equals out plus those things. Okay, just so you know that. And then what are we going to include? Well, array I, so in this case, let's say array 0, its URL, because this is a property. Remember, we're gonna create the array is filled with objects, and each object has properties. In this case, one of the properties is URL, and one of the properties is display, and so we can pull those out. And then we're gonna get the element by ID 01. That's way up here, and we're gonna set its HTML to be this new variable after it loops through. Okay, that's what we're doing. We do need one thing before we can run this, and that is the mytutorials.txt text file. So we're going to create a new file. Save it as, I think it was capital, tutorials.txt. Was it? MyTutorials, yeah. Oh, lowercase, darn it. Need a new one. File, save as, desktop, MyTutorials. It's probably going to scream at me that there's already one name that. Save. Would you like to replace? Yes, I would. Okay, great. All right, mytutorials.txt. Now, what should be the value of that? They have this myArray equals this. Right, that's what the array is. Don't worry about that. What we're going to do is we're going to do this. MyTutorials.txt. We're going to take this text file. Save it. Okay. Now what's going on in here? Look at what we've done. We have display. We have a square bracket. What's the square bracket mean to you? The square bracket means to me that an array is starting. Okay, so what is the array made up of? Well, the array is made up of this curly bracket, which usually denotes that we're doing JSON stuff. Again, JSON, each of these things in a curly bracket is one object. Okay, each of these is one object. So in this case, the array is made up of 1, 2, 3 objects. Now, what does each object have? Well, each object has a property that says display, and then colon, and then what that display value is. And then it has a URL, and it displays what the URL value is. Okay? Display URL, display URL. The key is that each of these have the same label at the beginning, right? So we know the property for each one is display. If this one was like display 1 and this one was display 2, everything would fall apart. It has to be the same. Because you're saying for this object, display is this and URL is that. Why is this important? This all seems like we're jumping into a very deep pool from the other stuff we've been doing. That's because as we keep moving forward now, when we contact other websites with our JavaScript, let's say we want to get the weather. Well, you know how the weather comes back? It comes back as JSON. That's what's so crazy about this stuff, is so much of the communications between websites and web apps all happens in JSON. So I just want you to know that, and that's why we're doing this. Okay, so there's my tutorials. Let's go to JSON data. Let's actually load this up in Firefox. And boom, it worked. Let's look at the page source. So none of those are listed, right? And none of them are listed, but they're all here. And that's because it was all built off the JSON file. So let's make some changes to the JSON file so you can see that. So you might want to do something like this. We want to add some stuff. The IDIA program, comma, URL, http://ubolt.edu. Right? And then we have to put our closing curly quotes, save it. I go here, I refresh, boom, it's right there. And it's all set to go. So again, with this code, it was able to read what was going on and generate this part of the page. So just so you know, the parts that are important to you that you'll change, because I'm not gonna lie, you're gonna use files like this and you're gonna use these as your basis. This and this is what changes. So what happens after it loads? Well, get the text and do something with it, right? In this case, you're creating an array out of a JSON has this parse thing that lets you cut itself up. You only need to know that. You don't have to worry about this stuff. And then the my function, which is not a bad idea to keep using something like this, is this whole out thing and this whole display, display, URL, whatever. You can change those for other types of uses for this, but it's a very useful example. So I'm going to have an exercise for you, and then we're going to pull it all together into something that makes that really brings it all together for us.